you, Kevin. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming along. We may get some people join us as we start, but we're going to start on time, finish on time or before. Thank you for coming. My name's Chris Farmer from UK Liberty, and I've just got a short presentation to make and a couple of questions to ask you. Okay, here we go. You may have seen Boris Johnson's recent statement. I don't know if you have over the last couple of days seen that he said, our freedom is being returned to us. Our freedom is being returned to us, says Boris, which I think is a very revealing statement, because our freedom is being returned to us actually means that we, the government, are slowly going to return your freedoms back to you, the people. That's the kind of restatement of what his original statement means, which itself actually means currently you're not free. Because if freedoms are being returned to us, it obviously implies that currently we are not free, which means that the government has failed. Because the primary purpose of a government in a democracy is the protection of individual rights and liberties. This is its fundamental and primary duty. Its primary duty is not to keep us safe. Its primary duty is to keep us free. If the primary duty was to keep everybody alive, then there would be no army, navy, and nuclear weapons, because they use the army to keep us free from coercion from other governments. So freedom is the primary purpose of government, to keep us free. And currently, we're not free. As I say, we employ the government to keep us free from coercion. That coercion may come from other citizens. So, for example, we have the police force, and we don't know the word force. It's the police force, because they use force to protect us from freedom from other citizens. And we also use force in the sense of the armed forces to keep us free from coercion from other governments. But now freedom does not mean freedom in the sense of liberty. It means freedom from risk, particularly from the risk of catching COVID-19. Now, I want to make a claim that the government has done what I call a bait and switch. Bait and switch, you may have heard of before. It's a concept that comes from sales. And baiting and switching is saying one thing and switching it to another thing. And the principle that I want to draw your attention to is the principle of switching definitions. Now, it's very important that we recognize when a government, or anybody in fact, is switching the definition of key terms. Because words are the tools of thought. Most people think in two primary forms. They think in words and pictures. Most people think in pictures in the mind. We're imagery animals. We like to picture things. And also we express ourselves in language. Now, words are very important because they are tools of thought. And every word should have a definite meaning. And the meaning should be shared and understood. If the meaning of words is corrupted, then thought is corrupted. If the meanings of words are distorted, then words lose their power to act as guides to logical thought and corrective action. And I'd like to make the claim that politicians spend their time bending the meanings of words to suit their crooked purposes. If you were in ancient Greece, you went to school, you'd go to two lessons. One would be logic and the other would be rhetoric. Now, logic is the scientific use of speech, where everything has a clear and distinct definition which doesn't change. That's what makes science science. Rhetoric is the opposite. It's the art of getting people to believe you by means other than science, by rhetorical means. Now, most politicians aren't scientists, they're rhetorical speakers, and they're good at it. Tony Blair would be an example of a person who is an excellent rhetorical speaker. So would say Winston Churchill. They're not scientists, they're rhetorical speakers. But one of the things that rhetorical speakers do is they bend the meaning of words to suit their own purposes. Now, I don't know if you've recently listened to Mrs. Curry. Do you remember Edwina Curry? Some of you who are older in years will remember Mrs. Curry because she put her foot in it when she said during the 1980s or the early 1990s that unfortunately the vast majority of the British egg production is infected with salmonella. Do you remember that? Single sentence destroyed the whole of the British egg industry for about a year. And Edwina Curry was being interviewed on the radio the other day, and she bends the meaning of words quite well. She said Edwina Curry suggested that people who won't have the vaccine can best exercise their freedom by being made to stay at home. Because she said, I don't want those people standing next to me. So that's her idea of freedom. Another instance of switching definitions is that of, quote, a COVID death. Now, we've talked about this on this channel before. The definition of a death, I mean, the whole thing is based upon COVID deaths. But what is the definition of a COVID death? If you ask the average person in the street what a COVID death means, they would probably say it means a death caused by a COVID virus. Unfortunately, that isn't the definition that's being used by the government. The definition of a COVID death, as you probably already know, is any death by any circumstances in any setting within 60 days of a positive COVID test. So whether you would get killed of COVID virus is not even in question. The link between the death and COVID is simply one of time. If you have a COVID test within 60 days and you die, then that's put down as a COVID death. So you could die of cancer and that goes down as a COVID death. You could be run over by a bus and that could be put down as a COVID death. And I think you've probably seen over the last couple of days, it's actually leaked out into the press now as a definite statement that 23% of the COVID deaths, now this is the ones they're reporting, they're accepting that maybe 23% of the so-called COVID deaths weren't. I'm going to suggest it's a lot more than 23%. So that would be another example of switching definitions. And a third example of switching definitions is the word vaccine. Now, vaccine, as it's traditionally understood, is a method of inoculating people against viruses by giving them an attenuated strain of the original virus. It's called vaccine from the word vacca for cow, because if you might remember your medical history, that it was done by Jenner, who discovered that people who got cowpox were then immune to smallpox. So they purposefully inoculated people with cowpox in order to prevent them from getting smallpox. And cowpox is a very close relation. So the idea of a vaccine is you get an attenuated strain and you give that to somebody, and that teaches the body to recognize the major strain, and then you are, got your prepared defenses. But this new, not all of them, but some of them, the new medications are not in that category of drug at all. These are things which are affecting the mRNA. The mRNA are the final steps that the body uses before it prints out a protein. Now, quite rightly, the medics have been saying all this talk about this being a DNA changing drug is false. It is false. It doesn't affect the DNA. The DNA is nicely tucked away in the nucleus. But outside in the protoplasm, there are elements that take copies of the DNA in the form of RNA and then transfer RNA. And the last one on the chain is mRNA. It's the very last thing that has to happen before a protein is made. So although it isn't a DNA changing drug, it has the effect of changing the sequencing of the proteins which are being made. Now, this is nothing to do really with a true vaccine. It's a completely different form of medication, and yet people are being told it's a vaccine. Well, only if you change the definition of vaccine. So what's going on, I think, is that we are purposefully being misinformed. Whenever words don't mean what they're supposed to mean, then anything can be called anything. That's the point I'd like to make here. They're playing with language, playing with concepts, and truth is the first casualty. The definition of fundamental concepts is and has been under attack for many years now. I've been watching it almost with a smile on my face, thinking these people can't be serious. They're joking, aren't they? I don't know if you've noticed, but certain basic concepts like man, woman, and mother are under attack. I was just listening to YouTube before I came on, and I was listening to a guy in the United States who was sacked for calling one of his students Mr. Smith, not Miss Smith, because the guy identified as a woman and he called him Mr. Smith and was sacked, and the guy is suing the college. I don't know if you've noticed, but in Manchester, they are now stopping the students from using the word mother, and they want the students to say the word carer instead of mother. Mother is now passé, it's not to be used. So these are very basic concepts, man, woman, and mother. If they can do that with this basic form of concept, then what can they do with other more elaborate concepts like vaccine? Now, when freedom loses its meaning to mean anything you want it to mean, if freedom actually means lockdown, then we're all in trouble. There is a sustained attack on logic, as far as I can tell, and it's being done on purpose. Now, I've shown this picture before, some of you may have seen this. The big picture in politics is that political freedom is an absolute primary. Health is a secondary issue. The economics is a secondary issue. Education is a secondary issue, and so is everything else. Unless we have political freedom, it doesn't matter about health, economics, and education if we don't have freedom. Political freedom is the job of politics. The politics' primary purpose is not health. Politics' primary purpose is political freedom. And it's an inversion and a perversion to put health over political freedom, health over economics, health over education. In other words, health has been put as a god above everything, including our freedoms. I would claim this is a perversion of the proper way of doing business for politicians. So what is the corrective action that we at UK Liberty propose? The first thing I think that we have to do is to reclaim language, reclaim logic. The corrective action which we propose begins when we start taking words seriously. We cannot allow people to take the word that we're thinking of and stick any meaning on it at all. So, for example, freedom means freedom. It means freedom to choose, freedom to speak, freedom to go out if you want to visit your mother, because freedom means freedom. People must be free to choose how they act without the intervention of the coercive force of the state. You've got to remember that the state is the only person authorized to use physical violence against fellow citizens. No other people can. But the forces can, and therefore this force must be tamed to the right principles. If it's tamed to the incorrect principles, we've got all hell breaking loose soon, I suspect. So what I'd like to do now is run through what we would consider to be a correct approach to the COVID crisis. I've got 10 points which I'd like to draw to your attention. Here they are, but you can't see them at the moment. I'll go through them one by one, and then we'll return to them at the end. So here are our 10-point plan for a correct, principled approach to the COVID problem that we've got. The first one is information of death rates should be kept free from distortion. This is the first point I made, that the death rates themselves have been inflated. I want to make a claim that although Boris says that they're using the best science, they're not using the best science. What they are doing is corrupting the statistics in order to provide the numbers that they require to maintain their narrative. They choose their narrative first, and then they go and find the numbers to back it up, rather than the other way around. So we should have death rates. A COVID death should be a COVID death. It should be a death caused by COVID. We can't have the situation when any death is deemed to be a COVID death. So that would be number one, top of the list. Number two, that's number one again. Number two, a vaccine that is offered should not be pressurized. Nobody should be pressurized. I've had 4 knocks on my door and 4 letters from the local health centre, because I'm over 50 years of age, they've been banging on my door asking me to go down and get a COVID jab. So there should be no pressure. It should be a completely free option. The vaccine should be an attenuated strain of the original virus and should not include modifications to the production of mRNA. That would be my first point, which is if it is a vaccine, it should be a vaccine. And if it isn't a vaccine, which leads us to the next one, if it isn't a vaccine, then if it is an mRNA medication, then the difference between the two should be clearly explained to the public, and then the risks associated to changing the mRNA profile should be carefully explained and contrasted to a proper vaccine, and then let the public make the choice. As far as I understand it, only the Johnson & Johnson jab is a true vaccine. All the others are mRNA medications. And so the Johnson, if I was forced into a position of having to have one, I would probably get the Johnson & Johnson. There should be no enforced lockdowns, since they are a manifest violation of our rights to our own liberties. And liberty is the primary purpose of any government. If a person chooses to self-isolate, that's absolutely fine. Then self-isolate on your own volition. And if a person does choose to self-isolate, they should self-isolate with the complete blessings of family and friends, and maybe the state would like to help them. But blanket lockdowns is not the way forward. There should be no enforced face masks. According to the research that I can tell, a virus is 0.1 micrometer. When I say a virus, I mean the coronavirus is 0.01 of a micrometer, whilst the filter of a normal face mask is 200 micrometers. So in other words, it's 2,000 times bigger than the virus it was trying to prevent. There is absolutely no way that a face mask is a tenable protection for stopping viruses, because viruses are airborne and there's gaps down the side and gaps around here and gaps around here. And most people are keeping it under their nose. And all of these things make it a completely unviable screen against viruses. I think, and as if you remember, we didn't have to wear the face masks for the first 3 months, and then suddenly they were compulsory. So I think that the face masks are more of a political move than they are a medical move. I believe that we should have all parks, recreational areas, businesses and stadiums, etc., should be left open, and people should choose whether they want to go. If they think it's too risky, don't go. But if you want to go out in the sunshine and enjoy it, go. There should be no enforced passport, health passport. I think they dropped the word passport now because they recognise from their samplings that the word passport was being disregarded by the public. So they've changed it to health certificate, because health certificate sounds like you've been awarded something, whereas passport sounds like an obligation. But I don't believe that we should have health passports, because this, I think, is one step towards Tony Blair's surveillance society. Now, do you remember Tony Blair said something like this about 2 years ago? He said a surveillance society may be the price we may have to pay to stay safe. Now, that safety that Blair was talking about 2 years ago was not corona, it was climate change. And he was already talking about a surveillance society in order to prevent us from catastrophe in the form of climate change. Now, I suspect that the COVID virus is just a temporary measure. When that one runs out, they'll go back to climate change as the means forward to push the surveillance society. But the passport and the health certificate is, I think, just one step along that road. I think people should be allowed to make choices based upon the principles of the best evidence rule. Now, I don't know if you know the principle of the best evidence rule. It comes from the law. In a court of law, the court is entitled to something called the best evidence, meaning you can't have second-hand evidence. You can't have evidence which is not of the primary source. So the court and the judge expects the evidence to be primary evidence, the best evidence there is. Anything else is hearsay and is inadmissible. Now, what is true for a court of law, I think, should be true for everybody in these life and death decisions. People have got the right to have the best evidence and not distorted narratives, which I think we are getting, because if anybody wants to criticize or question, they are immediately deplatformed. In fact, before we got here, Kevin was telling me that the Ofcom, the regulators for broadcasters, are preventing anyone from even questioning the narrative of the COVID lockdown. It's against the regulators' principles now to allow anyone even to question it. Now, if that's true, how can this possibly be the best evidence rule in practice? It's selected evidence only. So there are our 10-step plan, which I'll ask you about in a minute. And this is my closing point here. I believe that our government at the moment are either mistaken, stupid, or malicious. It might be that they're all three, I don't know. Mistaken is possible, stupid, unlikely, malicious, likely. I'm not sure about what you think, but personally, I think that this is a plan. I don't think this is an accident, and I don't think they're stupid. I think they know what they're doing. I think they are corrupted. I think they're dangerous, not stupid. Question, what do you think? Do you think they are mistaken, stupid, or malicious? So what I'd like to, that's the end of my short presentation. What I'd like to do now, if I may, is put the 10 points back up, and I'll step out the way, and then I'll hand it over to Kevin to moderate the conversation, and we can take any questions. The question is, do you have any questions? The question is, do you have any observations or comments to make? And then I'll come back to you in about 15 minutes, because I've got one more story I want to tell you about something that happened to me when I was in Asda. So, but I'll come back to you after you've had a chat with Kevin. Okay. Kevin, can I hand over to you? I'll leave that on the script. And we'll leave that as a menu for people to talk about.
Right. If you've got questions, if you, on your little menu at the bottom of the screen, there's a little hand. If you click on that, then that will show me that you've got a question, and I'll just ask you in rotation if you've got any questions. No hands? Yeah. Is that James? Need to unmute yourself, James.
Yeah, I made the old mistake, muted myself, and then forgot I'd done it. Thanks, Kevin. I suppose mine is more of an observation, really, rather than a question. The thing that I think is missing from that list is economics, which is always a difficult topic with the general public. But if there's ignorance generally that's been exhibited over the last year, in my meetings with colleagues at work, with members of the public, with friends and family, the biggest level of ignorance is in the economic arena. Some people have just no concept, no idea of the scale of what the Chancellor has done in the last year. You know, for anybody, you know, look, not everybody's an amateur economist. I am, for my sins. And, you know, in calendar 2019, the budget deficit was 45 billion. Calendar 2020, 255 billion. I mean, and that's off the Office of National Statistics website. You know, when you think how hard the government, I think they could have worked a lot harder, but how hard they had to work over 10 years to reduce the deficit from where it got after the Blair-Brown years down to some sort of respectability. And in 1 year, they've blown it completely. And of course, the deficit's probably going to be even bigger this year. It's certainly going to be as big as that, but probably even bigger. And I think one of the tasks we should have is, as I say, economics is a different issue, a difficult issue with the general public, but find some way of trying to convey to people, you know, that I used to make the joke that when government did something stupid, our children and our grandchildren would be paying for it. Well, quite frankly, you may as well say our great grandchildren are going to be paying for this. given what's happened. So that's just my 2 pennyworth in there.
I think you're absolutely right. The reason that we didn't bring it to the fore in this particular issue of the sizzle is because economics was the particular issue that we focused on last time. But you're absolutely right. And one of the rewriting of concepts. Earlier on, I was talking about the collapse of logic, and what we have now got. I don't know if you've heard of something called modern monetary theory. Modern monetary theory is, you're smiling, you must have heard of it, is the way that these modern economists have effectively thrown what you might call classical economics, going all the way back to Adam Smith and the rise of capitalism, which has seen the greatest growth in human lifespan and wealth production in the history of the human race over the last 300 years. I mean, we've had more progress in the last 300 years than we have in the last 2 million years. And what modern monetary theory does is take classical economics and throw it in the bin and just completely rewrite the rules, which says that a government cannot go bust. Why can't a government go bust, you might ask? And the modern monetary theorists say because the government can print money. It's the only organization that's entitled to print its own money. If you did it, you'd be put in jail. If the government does it, nothing happens. All they do is print more and more money, which they regard as wealth creation. Wealth creation is not the act of printing money. Productivity is the art of creating wealth. And if a government trashes the productive capacity of the economy, which it's currently doing, it's destroying small and medium-sized enterprises and trying to fill the gap by printing fake money, which they call quantitative easing. Have you heard that phrase? Quantitative easing. They don't even need a printing press anymore. All they have to do is go to the computer and keep hitting the 0 button and just add zeros to their bank balance. And they call that creating wealth. Well, I'm sorry, you can't create something out of nothing. It's one of the basic laws of physics. You can't create something out of nothing. But as far as monetary theory is concerned, oh, yes, you can. Well, at some point, the wheel will come off. Has to. It's inevitable. And the government says this has never been tried before. Oh, yes, it has. It's been tried lots of times. Look at Germany in the 1930s. They tried printing money. Look what happened to their economy. It completely collapsed. Printing money has been the trick of government since the dawn of time. But now you don't need a printing press. You just need a computer and a governor of the Bank of England who's prepared to push the buttons.
Yeah,
so
Chris.
Name I can't remember. The person who just spoke about economics, you probably know about modern monetary theory.
Yes, I mean, their cleverest ploy, which is the old Goebbels tactic, you use a name that's actually nothing to do with it at all. I mean, it's basically non-monetary theory rather than modern monetary theory. But I mean, you know, you've always got to give them full marks for being clever with stuff like that, I suppose. But yeah,
yes,
Chris, I agree with everything you've just said on that side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They use old Latin words like ex nihilo. We mentioned this last time. They use words like ex nihilo. Now, ex nihilo is Latin for out of nothing. They are the only ones in the universe who can create something out of nothing. You'd expect God to be able to create something out of nothing, but you wouldn't expect the governor of the Bank of England to be able to create something out of nothing. But hey-ho, modern monetary theory says that governments can create something out of nothing. They're lying. They can't do it.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
Thanks for that, Chris. Okay, Stephen, did you have your hand up? It came up and disappeared. So did you have a question?
Right.
Sorry, your hand. Yeah, your hand.
Sorry, I was away doing something else at the same time. I just thought it's just probably an observation. Probably very few of you have been on a flight in the past year. I was in Glasgow Airport early March, and then again late March, and I was just amazed I was shocked, just absolutely amazed. There was no flights out of this country. Only one to London from Glasgow, one to Belfast, and that was about it. It was for a busy international airport in Scotland. It was just absolutely shocking. I think like what you say about the economy, the hit to the economy. I think it's right. It's bigger than we know.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, if if the busiest airport in Scotland is, sitting idle, what's going on? It's.
Was that the pictures you put on Twitter?
Yeah,
I
sent that to you, Kevin. Yeah. But I mean, it's actually, we all know that it's what's happening, but to actually see it and see, 20 taxi drivers sitting in a queue doing nothing,
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake I've seen people make over the course of last year is separating jobs, businesses, and economics from people. So they'll say, well, what's a life compared to a job? And they're not making the connection that a job is somebody's life.
Yeah.
They may not be dying, but you're taking away their means to provide for their life, and they're equivalent. It shouldn't be one or the other. They are equivalent. Both you need to live and you need to produce to continue to live. And I think the separation of that as a concept as a whole has been really disheartening over the last year, and the way that the way that people have readily taken to the life at all costs is what matters. If you have to lose your job or your business or your house or your car, then as long as I'm safe, that's a price worth paying, and that's just really not sat well with me over the last year, and it just seems to be growing and growing and growing.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, in spite of my accent, I'm actually in Dorset, and there's a very famous chef here who's pretty much homeless. He's had 4 Michelin star chef restaurants. He's basically living in a food truck. He's had 4 high class restaurants in London, and he's basically reduced to nothing.
Yeah.
So
I think there'll come a time where businesses will have to say we're not doing it anymore, and we're opening. If every business opens, there's nothing they can do. They can't send police to close every business in the country. They just have to change their minds.
I'd like to ask the delegates if they'd like to. Anyone would like to say anything about one of those 3 options. Do you think the politicians are honest but wrong? They're mistaken. That means they're honest but they're wrong. This is what my daughters think. My 2 daughters, who are 33 and 30 years of age, think that Boris is doing the best job he can under difficult circumstances. I know other people who think that he's just an idiot, he's stupid. And I know people like me who thinks he's not stupid, he's malicious. And I'd like to know if anybody would like to say anything about, do you think they're mistaken but honest, stupid or malicious?
I think Ryan's got something to say.
Ryan?
I think it's a matter of malice, in the sense that they've seen how close or how successful China is economically short term. As you were saying earlier, political freedoms sort of are the main role of government, but I think our common culture now has sort of moved away from that into more hedonistic pursuits, and more people are happy with bread and games and just getting on, like using pubs as a leverage for people, that their life is nothing more than consuming and living in that sense. And they're trying to undermine that, because people in China are somewhat economically free, but they're not politically free. And China's now one of the growing superpowers of the world, pretty much. So I think the government's in some way trying to copy them and try and make people feel as though political freedom is not their fundamental pursuit.
Yes.
And that if they can try catch up with China on an economic scale, which I don't think they'll be able to, they're going to try implement the similar things that they've got, like social credit or more surveillance state type stuff. So I think it's a form of malice. But if you had to try persuade someone who does believe that there's not much more to life than economic freedom of going to the pub or consuming, how would you try persuade them that political freedom is fundamental to human nature almost?
If I'm trying to persuade somebody who has not really given it much thought, I simply ask this question. I say, what I do is I get my hands ready and I say, can I ask you a question? What is the primary purpose of a government? Is it to keep us free, or keep us rich, or keep us safe? Keep us free, keep us rich or in a job, or keep us safe? What's its primary purpose? Let's just say, keep us free or keep us safe. Which one would you say? And most people would say keep us free. If you give them that option, those two choices, keep us free or keep us safe. Most people would say, when you ask them bluntly, a lot of people will see that.
If someone was happy to say, I would happily have all these implements and measures in my life as long as I could just live the most luxurious life of, doing what they wanted to do economically, but not being able to say the things they wanted to say or so forth. How would you sort of engage with that if someone takes your argument but outright just says, I don't care for freedom?
I regard people as going into three groups: people who believe in freedom first, people who don't, and people who don't know. So the vast majority of people, I think, do believe in freedom, at least in principle. Some people say, to hell with freedom, so long as I got Netflix, I don't care. And I've heard people say, I don't care about my freedoms. I don't mind being locked in. And I just give up on those guys. So I'm never going to convince them to my side of the line. I'm looking for the ones in the middle, the ones who are persuadable, of which I think are about 60% of the population. In my mind, I got about 10% think the way we do. 30% are completely sold. You're never going to get them back. And there's a big chunk in the middle, 60% of people who think there's something wrong but can't put their finger on it. Now that 60%, the ones in the middle are the ones I'm going for. The ones who they know they've got the feeling in their gut that something is wrong, but they can't put their finger on it because after all, lives are important. The health save the NHS, that's got to be important. They've never realized that there is a hierarchy. And unless you present this hierarchy to them, it's never occurred to them to look at it. So this diagram here I find very helpful. Because if you said you've got to really make a choice, what do you think is the most important, the NHS or political freedom? Because at the moment you're losing your political freedom in order to save the NHS. So I would go for the 60. The people who you can't change. I don't even try. So you can't win everybody over. All you can win over are the people who are on the fence already. And there's a lot of those. Which leads me to my last point. Kevin, can I tell this little anecdote that happened to me the other day?
Yeah, sure.
I did tell you the other day. So I want you to imagine I'm in Asda with one of these on. I never wear a mask when I go to Asda, so I just put one of these on. And I'm walking around Asda. Everyone's got their masks on. And I saw one boy in there who was at 14. He didn't have a mask on, and nor did I. So there's two of us. And I was just looking at the stores. And I heard this man's voice say, excuse me. So I looked around and there's this guy and he said, you haven't got a mask on. I said, no, I haven't got a mask on. He said, where did you get that thing from? I want one. Right? He's got this where did you get that thing from? I want one. I said, you just get them off the government website. You just say that you got some phobia about it and you don't want to wear one. He said, I have got a phobia. I hate this bloody thing. It's giving me a panic attack. I can't breathe. I don't like wearing it. I want one of those. I said, take your mask off. He says, I can't take my mask off. It's not allowed. I said, take your mask off. No one's entitled to block your airway. If you want to breathe, take the mask off and breathe. So he very gingerly took one side off and held it like this. Just paused. And I said, take it off. And then there'll be three of us. There's a kid over there, there's me. And if you take yours off, there'll be three of us in the shop without a mask. And he took it off and said, oh, thanks, mate. And disappeared into the crowd. And I never saw him again. I wanted to find him after and take a selfie with him, but I never got round to it. Couldn't find him. Yeah. But what I was interested in is when I go in, I'm quite worried that I'm offending everyone. And there's another part of me which says, well, someone's got to be the first one not to wear the mask in this place. And when I walked in that day and this guy came up to me and asked me, I kind of gave him strength. Rather than offend him, I gave him courage to take his mask off. So Lindsay, who's with me here, she was waiting for me in the car, and I came out into the car park and said, Lindsay, I just made a convert. There's one down, 5,000 to go.
One mind at a time.
Yeah, 50. Yeah, one mind at a time.
Yeah. James.
Yeah, I was just going to say I like that anecdote of Chris's, because I think we've just got to, you know, I'm probably giving the British public too much credit here, but I do feel we're at a tipping point where, even given the hugely disappointing response from most people over the last year, I'm beginning to feel with friends, acquaintances, colleagues of mine, that they've just had enough of this. And I think we've got this natural break coming up where we're coming out of this lockdown, and given the nature of the virus and summer and all that sort of stuff, one would hope that the soonest one's likely to see another lockdown is sometime in the autumn. And I think every person you can convert over the next 6 odd months, something like that, is one more person who, when Boris announces the next lockdown, is just going to go, no, sorry, this is not happening. Because that's what we've got to get to in the end. Because the only thing that's going to stop this is, you know, basically civil disobedience. The majority of the population just saying, no, it's not happening.
Yes.
So
I think you're absolutely. I think there will be another lockdown late this year, and I think that will be the test as to whether they succeed or fail. Up till now, up till now, the public has given the government the benefit of the doubt and has gone along with it, and they paid a big price for that. And I think that the government has been pulling the wool over people's eyes by talking about their roadmap back to freedom. But I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever, because Sunak has already extended furlough, and Boris Johnson has extended his extraordinary powers for another 6 months. I have absolutely no doubt that before the end of the year, there will be a new strain of the virus, and we'll have another lockdown. And at that point, we will learn whether the public will cow down again or not. I don't think they will.
No.
Which is why I'm standing here tonight. I'm not standing here tonight because now is the time it's going to happen. I'm standing here tonight to practice the messaging, practice our skills, practice our argumentation, so when it kicks off, we're ready. Yeah. And I would like all of you who have come today, I mean, very small numbers, but I'm expecting it because the kickoff hasn't started. You know, we're 6 months too early, but we have to prepare now all our argumentation, all our messaging, all our best words and phrases, so that when people are ready to listen to the message, we have got the message ready to give them. And we need to practice our arguments, turn that vast majority, the silent majority, onto saying no. And in terms of rioting and protesting, I don't believe that we need to march through the streets and break windows and throw things at the police. I believe in Gandhi's principle of passive resistance. Remember Gandhi? He threw the British out of India without firing a shot. All he did was say no. That's it. I'm not doing it. Taking my mask off, I'm not playing. And if everybody did it, that would just crack. You wouldn't have to have everybody disagree. You'd only have to have 30% of the population say no, and the whole thing would collapse.
Well, as you probably noticed, I chose my words very carefully there. Civil disobedience. I didn't say civil violence. I said
yes. Yes, I did notice what you said. Yes.
Just disobedience. That's
just disobedience.
Just saying no. We're not doing this.
Yes, yeah. I know that there's a big rally in London later on this month. I'm not going to go and march through the streets, as I think it's a complete waste of time, because how many people marched against Tony Blair's war? It makes no difference to the politicians how many people march through London. They have that every weekend. So I'm not going to march. I'm just going to say no, and I'm going to explain the argument to everybody who I can bump into, who I think might be at least a little bit receptive. And if we can all do that, and if we can all practice our message, and if you can get other people along to these sizzle meetings and just build a slow following, we need to get a core number. If we could get 100 people, maybe that would be a sufficient seed to get a lot more than 100 because of the law of geometric growth.
Okay, thank you. Right, Ryan, you've got a question. I think we'll make this the last one because it's 5 to 9. Yeah. So Ryan, go ahead.
I agree with the sentiment that protests are a bit useless. I went to the London protest about like May time last year, and 80% of the crowd are just people with genuine issues, but about 20%, 10% are idiots with microphones who shout platitudes that they don't know what they're talking about, and they genuinely make a lot of people who do care for freedom or their issues just look like idiots. So you don't want to be an idiot by association. But the only thing I'd say about the protest is that the people there who are the 80%, who are sort of quiet people who just want to show support, are, I think, the 60% you'd like to win over. Like, not to go and have a big hoo-ha about it, but just to go and chat with people and let them be aware that, like, we're here and we do this is all. I think it is a good start to talk to those people who are just there being silent and showing themselves, and not with the microphones being idiots. That's all I've got to say about that.
If we can encourage you people who came tonight to come again, and if we can encourage you people who came tonight to bring some friends who are like-minded souls, then, you know, over a period of months, by the time we get to September, when I think it's really going to kick off, because I think lockdown will come again in about September or October, then we need to have our UK Liberty messaging absolutely primed to a point, which is why Kevin and I keep doing this every 2 weeks.
Speaking of which, the next one is on the 29th. I think the actual, excuse me while I die, the actual topic is yet to be confirmed. I think it will be on freedom, what it is, what it means, how to achieve it. But I will confirm that. You'll be able to book from tomorrow morning for that by going to Liberty Sizzle, the libertysizzle.info/UK Liberty Party. That's on you can go on the Twitter or Facebook page, and the link's there for that as well. I think most of you have probably already came via that way anyway. If not, just drop us a DM on Twitter and I'll send a link to you, etc. The 10 points that Chris had in his presentation, would you find it helpful if I made that into a downloadable leaflet that was nice and pretty, that you could keep and share and things like that? Yeah. I'll get that sorted out as well then.
What happens is I wrote that and I sent it to Kevin. He made some final adjustments, and then we agreed that between us that would be a fair basis for our discussion this evening. It's not set in stone. It's not the 10 commandments. It's simply discussion points for you to ponder and to you to make the points to other people with whom you come into contact.
I was going to put it on 2 tablets as well. Okay. Right. Has anybody got any last question? Or we'll call it a night. Okay. Well, thank you all very much for coming. I look forward to seeing you next time.
All right. Cheers, Kevin.
See you on social media. Take care.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye. Bye.